Hello, everyone. Thanks for checking out this special episode of Really Dicey. This is Manny, and I'm here with.
Craig Campbell. Hi. Yeah, I'm the owner of Nerdburger Games, and I'm here talking to Manny. It's so great to be back on the show.
Yes, yes. You're always welcome. You come out with such not just so many projects, but really good projects. It seems like I think I've gushed about this before, but Low Stakes is definitely my favorite of what you've
Oh,
made so far.
thank you.
Today we're going to talk about your newest project, which is coming out on Kickstarter soon. Code Warriors.
In Code Warriors, you play programs like computer programs living inside of a computer world,
Hmm.
and the computer is crashing, and it may be crashing for the last time. So it's sort of their version of the apocalypse. Everything's coming to a grinding halt. Everything's falling apart. Things are derezzing, crumbling. Graphics are getting goofy. You're seeing the wireframes, underneath things. And so it plays off of tropes of video games and like what we have seen in video games and computer rendering. Um, and everything kind of degrades and falls apart as the system crashes, and your characters are caught up in the middle of that.
If I may ask, where did you get inspired by this tale? I mean, I guess it's very easy to say Tron, but I was looking at I was looking at this though, but it seems it takes things in a very different direction. It feels like.
Yeah, well, and that's kind of where it started. Was I found myself thinking, why isn't there a Tron role-playing game? There's probably a lot of reasons behind that, because I'm sure that the license is very expensive,
Hmm.
being a Disney property, and the fact that there's only been two movies, and they were very spaced out in time. So like, it's not like there's been 7 or 8 movies in 12 years or something like that.
Yeah.
Um, but it is, Tron is one of those. It's beloved to a lot of geek culture, and it just kind of occurred to me that there's not been a lot of like living inside of a computer generated world games. So I decided, I thought, I'd go down that path. Like, what can I do with that? And the more I looked at it, like for example, the stories in Tron are very personal. They're about humans going into the machine, into the computer. And there's a very human element to it. And I thought, well, there's so much more that we can do with that. And I wasn't sure, like, well, what do the characters do? What are the stories about? And so I just basically started thinking about, okay, well, what are computers to us? What do I experience with computers? And that led to ideas for how to do the illustrations and play off of kind of bold graphics and video game, something that looks kind of video gamey but not too video gamey, because I want the world to kind of be unique and stand on its own. And like, just all the different things that computers are known for. And one of the things that they're known for, of course, is crashing or freezing, or like something bad happening with the computer. And then it occurred to me, well, okay, well, if there's these little program people living inside the computer, what's that like for them
Hmm.
when that sort of thing happens? And then that just kind of took off from there, and I started exploring the idea a lot deeper.
Well, was it difficult creating the setting for this world because it's not like uh, it's not physical. It's all electronic in a sense made.
Right.
How did you set up the setting for this world?
It was tough to imagine what the world would be like, because um it doesn't, there's no analog. There's like, I've made Capers, which is like set in the 20s, so you can assume certain knowledge about like the real world. Fantasy games have a lot of shared tropes. Like what a computer world can be like can be, literally anything. Um, and so I just basically decided, okay, I want to have enough things about the world that are familiar and understandable. So you've got these characters; they all, they're different programs. They have different functions. They look different, um, and they live and work in like a world that is kind of similar to our own, in that they have homes, they have places that they go to work, they have places where they go for entertainment, they have, there are cities and towns, and there's vehicles, and they have access to some of the things that we kind of know and understand. But then there's also things that in this world make no sense to have. They don't breathe, so there's no need for plant life.
Mm.
to build back up the oxygen level, because there's no atmosphere to speak of. Like there's a cycle of light and dark that has to do with function and downtime, but there's not a sun and a moon per se. And that, so it just kind of built out of there. So I thought, like, if there's enough things that are different or just absent, the world will seem alien and interesting to explore, but there's enough aspects of it that are familiar that it won't be overwhelmingly alien.
I really like the art direction. I know we mentioned Tron as an inspiration, but the art doesn't say Tron at all to me. It's a very lively, lots of color. It gives me that old school Saturday morning cartoon feel almost.
Right.
Can you talk a little bit about the art direction for this book?
Yeah, the art is done, all of it's done by a guy named Dan Morrison, and he's done a lot of this really vibrant color art. And he started working on concepting for stuff back when I started working on the game, which was like 4 years ago. And then the game kind of came to a halt for a while, and I was lucky and happy that he was still interested and available to pick it up again when I came back to it. But the idea was to create this world that's like very vibrant and full of color, because it is a computer world. So you can do some fun things with it, and it can look kind of video gamey, and like you said, a little bit Saturday morning cartoony, but not too much. But then the question the challenge that I ran into was like, well, what does the apocalypse look like? What does it look like when everything starts breaking down? And it doesn't look like that anymore. And I thought, well, if I just start dulling the colors, and muting the colors and having things like that happen, that starts to get a little unexciting to look at. Like, that doesn't make for terribly interesting art. Even, it would be okay if it was like a few pieces, but like to have half the book be like this kind of dull color for the artwork when the rest of it is so bright, it looked a little weird. So Dan and I kind of together hit on the idea of early in the apocalypse, when things are just starting to fall apart, everything looks bright and colorful and has all these these bold shapes and colors that you'll see in the game. But then as the apocalypse goes along, it steps back in rendering. So it starts to look more and more like old video games. Like, you start to see the wireframes of things underneath poking through as things are breaking down. Landscapes start to look less like landscapes and more like polygons of shapes, and you don't see as many curves, you don't see as many circles. You start to see a lot of hard edges to things. And the idea being that, people would recognize, it's described a little bit in the book, but then it's also visualized with the artwork, that like you should be able to look at the artwork once you kind of understand how that works and say, oh, this piece of art, this shot is from very far along in the apocalypse, because we're seeing these very simple, kind of almost like low res graphics and wireframes popping out from underneath stuff. And there's just not as they're still interesting in bold colors, but it's less busy and complex than it is in the artwork, where it's like everything's a little nicer and there's more going on. That's more representative of like early in the apocalypse, before everything falls apart.
What I know, with your work, you tend to have really, really interesting messages and themes. What type of you're dealing with the setting, and they also dealing with their version of the apocalypse. What messages and themes are you hoping that players can sort of explore around? Are you hoping that they get a different view of society, of gaming, of the end time type of myth? Was there anything like that, or in this work?
Well, I thought, as I do with a lot of the games that I've designed, I put ways into the game to play it in different ways. There's ways to play, not only mechanically, you can tweak things by having certain game mechanics work a certain way. There's tracks of check boxes that you fill in when you do different things, and sometimes you can make those checkbox tracks longer or shorter, and that has an effect on gameplay. But then also in this, taking a cue from video games, there's 3 modes that you can play in. You can play in easy mode, which is essentially like everything progresses to kind of mid-level apocalypse. Think like what Mad Max movies are like. And then that it kind of stalls there, and that's just the world that you live in now, where it isn't this organized place anymore. There's, marauding gangs of programs on vehicles running around, battling each other for resources and so forth. You can play it on hard mode, which is the apocalypse is happening. It's going to get worse and worse. It's going to wipe everything out, but the characters can prevent that. And then you can play it on hopeless mode, where the apocalypse is coming, it's all going to get wiped out, and there's nothing anyone can do about it. So it becomes more a question of like, well, what do you do with the time that you have left? And you can play it from that kind of level. And then within each of those modes, you can do a lot of different things. And like one of the core conceits of the game is that it was an ordered society. It was almost sort of a classist society where there were programs who had very specific roles. They had certain jobs. They did those jobs. Everything functioned and ran and hummed along nicely. And then suddenly the apocalypse happened, and those jobs mean nothing anymore. Anybody can be and do anything. So what happens to society when those rules are removed? And then it presents a world where in some places those rules begin to reassert themselves, and people try to take control and pigeonhole people back, pigeonhole programs back into their old roles. There's other places where they might form completely different organizations for their society or their government. There's places where it might just be anarchy and chaos because, hey, why not? And the setting is set up in such a way. I wanted it to be a dynamic setting. So for GMs, you basically track through what are called collapse phases for the game. And as the game goes along, you'll progress through several of these. And for every setting, for every location that's described in the game, there's like 2 or more descriptions of what happens to that location with the characters, with the NPCs and everything that's going on there, if the characters do not affect anything at different collapse phases. So like if the characters never go to this particular town over here where there's like some sort of warlord rising up, by late in the apocalypse, that warlord is very strong and has gathered all sorts of other programs on their side. But if the characters go in there early in the apocalypse, they might depose the warlord and change the course of that town's future. And so I did that with like all the locations, have kind of a discussion of like, well, what happens if the characters don't show up, so that the apocalypse it's always moving. There's always something changing.
Oh, that's fascinating. Who can you or what can you be in this game?
You can be, there's 7 different program types. And we don't really have the time to get too super deep into each of them, but basically there's, as examples, there are ops who are like, they're the operating system, the underlying core of the system. They were, before the collapse began, they were the programs that kind of kept all the little systems and everything that happens behind the screen running, behind the scenes running. There are procs who are, they were like they were part of word processing and just like day-to-day programs, like the stuff that you and I would use on a computer all the time, right? There are browse who were part of search engines and browsers, and they all kind of had roles. Like browse were explorers and librarians, and like they did things that kind of fit with like being a search engine or a browser, with gathering and recording information and understanding things, where procs kind of like they were almost like the manual laborers of the world. Like they were the ones who had kind of the boring jobs. But then, when the collapse hits, they don't have to go to those jobs anymore. Like they can become something else completely. And then there's, we kind of hit on all of the other there are virus protection programs, and there are programs that are um, like part of video and audio recording and playback. So
Mm.
they have like ability to record and store all that sort of stuff. And like each program type has certain features that are unique to it, so that only they can get those. But then the all programs can also gain various upgrades and gear and things so that you can vary your character in a lot of different ways.
I see that there's a section here for like NPC programs, aberrants, system hazards. So it looks like there's not precisely apocalypse, there's other dangers that you for players. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, like aberrants are the monsters essentially of the game. They are bad code and bad graphics and corrupted systems that have taken on a form, and they vary from very weird, strange things to like kind of computer world versions of like certain types of monsters that we've seen in games. Like there's a series of monsters in there that are called hive monsters that are just, there's different types. There's like soldiers and drones, and um the hive head, who's like a queen, a queen, and they look like pixelated insects, and they have abilities that are kind of commensurate with different types of like the strata of like hive insects, where you've got a queen and soldiers and drones and so forth, and they have different roles and they do different things. And then there's all sorts of like just really weird stuff, and some of it's just kind of play on words, and like there's some tongue-in-cheek sort of stuff. And then system hazards are like they're not creatures, they're environmental in many ways. There's things like what is it called, a J-wave cascade, that's just like this like cascade of energy that flows through the area, and it screws a whole bunch of stuff up. And those are things that you have to find ways to protect yourself from when they start happening, or find, if you do get hit by it, you have to find a way to recover, have yourself, your program character recover. And also the area, like sometimes these things affect the region, they affect the NPCs, they can affect the landscape, and cause different things to happen. And there's different ways that you can try to recover from those things.
Hmm. So let's talk a little bit about the Kickstarter plan for this. What are your stretch goals? What details can you share with us?
Oh, well, the game starts at the goal is a 192 page book. And the goal, the funding goal for that is a little lower, to kind of get like the slimmest version of the game. And then so the first few stretch goals will add pages and beef up the game to the full 192 pages, which I think, I'm not overly concerned about hitting. I think we'll get there. And then beyond that, there's some ideas in play. Like I'm looking at Code Warriors being on Roll20, because it makes perfect sense that there should be an online presence, online playable version of the game. And there are some aspects of the game that would work particularly well with Roll20, with everybody being able to share a screen and see some things. So that's all being developed. There's it's not a stretch goal thing. It's going to be available right from the outset, but I decided to be a bit of a sucker because I think custom dice are really cool, and I know there are people that really love custom dice. So one of the tiers in the game, in the Kickstarter, offers custom D8s. The game uses a pool of D8s because 8 bits in a byte. Which is where that came from. I just kind of latched onto it. It's like I refused to let it go. But there's really cool custom dice, so you can get, like, if you want to be like the completist and have like here's the PDF, here's the cool book, and here's a set of 68 in a custom tin. You can get all of that too. And there's a few other things, but we got to see if we can get there.
I was about to ask you about the rules. You mentioned a bit about the D8s. This rule says, is it similar to some of the other zines you have put out in the past when it comes to creating stats and so forth?
Yeah, this it uses what I call the roll track system, which is the same game mechanic system that was used in Good Strong Hands, and Nowhereville, and that's the rule system that was nominated for best rules. Of course, I was building the game for Code Warriors long before that all happened, but I'm really happy that it did, because like it gives me a little extra cachet. But it's a relatively straightforward system. Everything's player facing. The players roll all the dice. And you've got 4 traits, which are body, mind, charm, and heart, and everything's going to be based off of those things. And when you make trait checks, every time you make a trait check, you'll mark a checkbox in one of 3 tracks as well, which are called skill, juice, and overload. And when you fill up, each of the tracks works a little differently. Like if you fill up skill, you get to clear that track out and advance your character. Juice is a currency that you can use just to purchase and do things in the game. And then overload fills up, and if you fill up overload, you clear it out and your character glitches, because as the collapse progresses, the system becomes more and more unstable, and because you're a program, you're inherently tied to it. Like everything is one with the system. So if you overload, you glitch, and have to deal with that problem.
Is there anything about this that I haven't asked you about that you wanted to share about Code Warriors?
Oh boy. Yeah, I'm just going to throw this out there because this is one of those things that'll work nicely into the Roll20 game. Is the world map is it's a plane, just a square plane, and it's gridded out into 8 sector, 8 by 8. An 8 by 8 grid, right? So sectors, and you're rolling d8s in the game. And at different collapse phases, things can happen to those sectors as the system degrades. So the GM will roll a d8 and a second d8 and determine, on the x-axis and the y-axis, okay, that sector something happens. And there's a table to roll on for that too. So the map will be very dynamic and change over the course of the game. And the hope with the Roll20 thing is we're going to give you all the map tiles. And so you can actually, like on Roll20 on your screen, you can move those tiles around and or erase some of them, delete them as needed, as your world map changes during the apocalypse. Again, a dynamic world setting.
So when will this be out on Kickstarter?
We're launching on Tuesday, September 27th, and it'll run for about a month.
Oh, excellent. And one last question. I know you put out so much games out there in such a quick amount of time. I'm curious, do you have anything planned after this?
Yeah, the Annie nomination for Good Strong Hands made me say, okay, why not? Let's pull the trigger. I've wanted to do a supplement for Good Strong Hands since the game came out, but I wasn't really sure that the game would support it. Just that because the game was a modest success, but with a little oomph behind it from award nominations, and thinking that I can probably get people interested in the core game with a supplement being offered as well, and doing a Kickstarter for that. So I've been working on a supplement since Gen Con, which I've been like hard down on writing and getting some stuff underway for that. That is currently tentatively titled "What Is Light Without Dark," which is a Good Strong Hands is a quote from Neverending Story. "What is Light Without Dark" is a quote from Legend.
Oh wow! Oh, that's exciting. And what's great about your books also is like it's very timely. So, I don't know if you're aware. I'm just starting getting the news right now about what's going on with the Disney Expo that's happening, and I've heard that they're releasing a new Tron cartoon, as well as they're doing a remake of Never-Ending Story.
Yeah, there's been some serendipity there.
Yeah.
Like obviously I had no idea that any of that stuff was happening when I started into all of this, but like Good Strong Hands came out around the time the Netflix what do you call it? Not Labyrinth. What's the other? Dark Crystal. Right around the time the Netflix Dark Crystal series happened. The Good Strong Hands takes a lot of inspiration from 1980s fantasy movies, including Dark Crystal and Neverending Story and so forth. So yeah, it's exciting to see those fantasy movies that are in that they're so beloved to many and beloved to me, and are quite honestly one of the reasons I got into D&D in the first place, because when I started playing D&D in college in the early 90s, I was like, oh, this is like, I can play all my favorite fantasy movies from the 80s. And that, that's one of the things that kind of sparked me into playing D&D in the first place, which was the beginning of the road that led me here.
Thank you for taking the time to talk about Cold Warriors. I will put a link in the description for viewers if you want to check it out, as well as Good Strong Hands. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned for more videos. Have a great day.